The soft hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound in Michael Harrington's penthouse as he sat at his mahogany desk, staring at the stack of divorce papers in front of him. The ink on the final page had already dried, but he kept turning it over in his hands, as if the act alone could undo what was written. His pen, a sleek, engraved Mont Blanc Emily, had gifted him years ago when he secured his first major investment deal, rested heavily between his fingers. It had once been a symbol of her faith in him, her belief that his ambition could build not only an empire, but also a life for the two of them. Now, it felt like a cruel reminder of promises unkept. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the San Francisco skyline sparkled, a view most men would envy. Yet to Michael, it shimmered hollow, mocking his victory. Emily's absence echoed louder than any sound in the vast penthouse. Once, her laughter had filled these rooms, bouncing off polished surfaces and softening the cold edges of luxury. He remembered nights when she would curl up on the couch with a blanket, urging him to set his laptop aside, reminding him that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. He had always brushed her off with a kiss, and the promise of later, now, later, had run out. She had left earlier that morning, a worn leather duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her hazel eyes clouded with a sadness that mirrored his own but steeled with resolve. Michael hadn't stopped her. Pride had glued his lips shut when his heart screamed for him to beg. He told himself he was in control, yet watching her disappear through the door had been the moment he realized how powerless he truly was. As the door clicked shut behind her, silence descended like a sentence. Michael sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had stood, the faint trace of her perfume lingering in the air. He poured himself a glass of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the city lights, and lifted it with trembling hands. The first sip burned his throat, but the ache inside his chest burned deeper. He looked again at the divorce decree, the official seal embossed in the corner, sealing not only their marriage but also the life he had once envisioned for them. On his desk sat a framed photograph of happier days. Emily laughing in the Napa Valley sunshine, her hair loose and wind-tossed, her hand entwined with his. Michael closed his eyes, pressing the glass against his forehead. For the first time in years, the man who conquered markets felt defeated. In the weeks following Emily's departure, Michael Harrington buried himself deeper into the fortress of his work. The headquarters of his tech empire in downtown San Francisco became both his refuge and his prison. From dawn until long past midnight, his days blurred into endless meetings, investor calls, and product launches. To the outside world, he appeared unshaken, a visionary billionaire guiding his company to greater heights. Yet behind the tinted glass walls of his corner office, the emptiness gnawed at him. Success had always been his currency, and he spent it lavishly to silence the ache, but the silence persisted. At night, he returned to the penthouse with its gleaming marble floors and panoramic views, only to be met by shadows and silence. The same bed that once carried the warmth of her presence now felt vast and cold, mocking him with its emptiness. He tried to distract himself with the indulgences his wealth afforded. Galas, rooftop parties, and high society dinners filled his calendar. Elegant women, draped in designer gowns and shimmering jewels, smiled at him across champagne glasses. To the tabloids, he was enviable, a bachelor billionaire moving on swiftly from heartbreak. But Michael knew the truth. Every laugh he forced, every polite compliment he uttered, felt like sand slipping through his fingers. None of them were Emily. None of them carried the sincerity in her eyes or the warmth in her touch. Conversations turned hollow, their words empty against the backdrop of clinking glasses and orchestrated music. The city lights that once inspired him now seemed like neon reminders of how easily he had traded intimacy for ambition. The more he sought distraction, the more the void inside him widened, a silent wound that no party could heal. Sometimes, when the parties ended and the noise receded, he found himself wandering the streets of San Francisco alone. He passed bustling coffee shops where young couples leaned into each other, laughing over shared secrets. He noticed the way fathers carried their children on their shoulders, pointing out the sparkling Bay Bridge lights. Every glimpse of ordinary happiness twisted the knife deeper. Michael realized that while he had built an extraordinary empire, he had failed to hold on to the one thing that gave it meaning. Wealth, power, prestige. All of it lay useless against the ache of solitude. He returned home night after night to an apartment that was more museum than home, where art pieces hung perfectly but lifelessly on pristine walls. And in those quiet moments, as he stared at the skyline, he wondered if this was all he had left. Success without soul. Portland greeted Emily Carter with a silence she hadn't known in years. After the constant roar of San Francisco, the whir of traffic, the ringing phones, the clinking glasses of social events, the small Oregon city felt like another world. Her rental house was modest, a weathered craftsman tucked away on a tree-lined street, its paint faded and its yard wild with dandelions. Yet when she turned the key that first evening, she felt something she had long craved: peace. The room smelled faintly of cedar, the wooden floors creaked beneath her feet, and the kitchen window opened to a garden tangled with ivy. It was imperfect, but it was hers. She unpacked slowly, setting down the few boxes she had carried from her old life. Every object she pulled from them was a memory, some heavy, some sweet, but here, in this quieter place, she hoped they would lose their sting. Adjusting to her new life was not without its struggles. Gone were the penthouse views and the luxury of full-time staff. Now, Emily shopped at neighborhood markets, carried her own groceries, and scrubbed her own floors. She worked part-time at a local elementary school, teaching literature to children who greeted her with unfiltered smiles and endless questions. The salary was modest, but the satisfaction was profound. At night, she curled up with a blanket on her small sofa, listening to the sound of rain tapping against the roof, reading novels she once adored but had abandoned in the whirlwind of Michael's world. Each day was a reminder of what she had traded opulence for authenticity, spectacle for simplicity. And while she sometimes lay awake questioning whether she had made the right choice, her heart whispered that breathing freely was worth more than gilded cages. Emily also began to rediscover herself in ways she hadn't anticipated. On weekends, she strolled through Portland's art markets, talking with painters and potters whose works reflected the imperfect beauty of life. She found joy in sipping coffee at corner cafes, sketching thoughts in her journal, and walking trails along the Willamette River. Slowly, she was piecing together a life that was entirely her own, one not overshadowed by Michael's ambition or the suffocating demands of his empire. Yet even in her newfound freedom, memories of him lingered. There were moments when she caught herself reaching for her phone, tempted to call and share a story, only to stop mid-thought. Their love, once bright and unshakable, now lived as a ghost in her heart, present but untouchable. Emily knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, she felt a fragile seed of hope take root. 3 months had passed since the ink dried on the divorce papers, yet Michael Harrington found himself in Portland on business. His company had invested in a healthcare startup, and he agreed to tour one of the city's hospitals to strengthen investor relations. The sterile corridors, lined with pastel walls and fluorescent lights, felt worlds away from the glass towers of San Francisco. As he walked beside the hospital director, nodding politely at explanations about new technology, his mind wandered restlessly. He had not expected Portland to unsettle him. The quiet streets, the slower pace, the air heavy with pine. But something about being here stirred a discomfort he couldn't name. Then, as they turned a corner near the maternity wing, Michael froze. Ahead, standing by a vending machine, was a face he had rehearsed 1,000 times in his memory, but had not seen since the day she left. Emily. For a moment, Michael thought he was hallucinating. She looked both familiar and transformed. Emily's hair, loosely braided, glinted under the fluorescent lights, and her hazel eyes widened the moment they met his. Yet it wasn't her gaze that shattered him, it was the gentle curve of her stomach beneath a simple cotton dress. His breath caught, and the world narrowed until all he could see was that undeniable sign of life. A baby bump. Their baby, His chest tightened with a mixture of disbelief and piercing regret. He remembered her sadness the day she left, the way she had whispered that all she wanted was to be seen. Now, standing in front of him, carrying a child he hadn't known about, she was more radiant than ever, but also untouchable. Words tangled in his throat, but all he managed was her name, spoken like a prayer. Emily. Emily's expression hardened almost instantly, a shield rising where vulnerability once lived. "Michael," she said, her tone steady but clipped. She adjusted the strap of her bag, her posture protective, instinctively resting a hand on her stomach. For her, the last 3 months had been about reclaiming her life, building something new without the shadow of his ambition. Seeing him here, in this place, felt like an intrusion, a storm breaking into the fragile calm she had worked so hard to create. Michael took a step closer, desperation raw in his voice. "Why didn't you tell me?" But Emily's eyes flickered with both pain and resolve. "Because some things aren't yours to control anymore." With that, she turned and walked down the hall, leaving Michael rooted in place. For the first time, the man who thought he had everything realized just how much he had lost. Back in his Portland hotel suite, Michael Harrington sat motionless in the dark, the city's rain-soaked streets glimmering through the window. The image of Emily's rounded belly replayed in his mind on an endless loop, each repetition stabbing sharper than the last. He poured himself a bourbon, but the burn in his throat did nothing to dull the ache in his chest. How had he not known? How had he been so blind? His empire, his billions, his accolades, none of it mattered when weighed against the life he had lost, and the new one that now grew without his knowledge. He had once believed he was a man in control, but tonight, staring into his glass, he saw only failure. Not as a businessman, not as a visionary, but as a husband, and perhaps as a father. The weight of that realization left him hollow. Sleep refused to come. Instead, memories surfaced like ghosts. Emily curled up beside him on the Napa Vineyard trip, laughing as she spilled wine on his shirt. Emily waiting at the door with candles lit when he finally came home after midnight. Emily whispering that all she wanted was to be seen, not surrounded by walls of wealth. Each memory felt like a blade twisting in his ribs. He had dismissed her quiet pleas, always assuming there would be time later. Now, later no longer existed. He realized with a sickening clarity that while he had been chasing markets and mergers, she had been drifting further away until she disappeared entirely. The thought that Emily had carried this secret, this child, without him was unbearable. His chest tightened as regret flooded him, heavier than any loss he had faced in business. As dawn crept through the curtains, Michael sat slumped in the armchair, his eyes bloodshot, his body exhausted, but his mind relentless. For years he had thrived on momentum, never pausing, always pushing forward. But now, time seemed frozen, trapping him in a moment he couldn't undo. The weight of regret pressed so hard that even breathing felt like a struggle. He understood now that money could not buy forgiveness, nor could ambition erase absence. Somewhere across the city, Emily was preparing for a future that no longer included him, carrying not only their history, but the possibility of new life. For the first time, Michael faced a truth he could not outspend, outmaneuver, or outwork. He had lost her trust, and perhaps his chance to be part of his child's world. And that truth broke him more than failure ever could. Michael Harrington was not a man accustomed to waiting, yet he found himself standing outside Willow Haven Women's Shelter, where Emily now worked. The modest White House, with its flower boxes and peeling paint, looked nothing like the glass towers he had built his empire within. Clutching a paper cup of coffee, he rehearsed the words he might say if she agreed to see him. Days had passed since the hospital encounter, but the image of her walking away, protective hand over her stomach, haunted him. Finally, he stepped inside, his presence seeming out of place among the modest furniture and soft laughter of children in the background. When Emily appeared at the end of the hall, her expression hardened, guarded. "Michael," she said flatly, "this isn't your world." The distance in her tone was sharper than any boardroom defeat he had endured, but he refused to turn back. He began showing up in small, almost desperate ways. He left fresh flowers at the shelter's doorstep, signed anonymous donations, and lingered at the local cafe she was known to frequent. Each gesture was an attempt to bridge the chasm he had created, but Emily remained unmoved. One afternoon, when she spotted him at the cafe, she approached his table, her voice firm. "Stop shadowing me, Michael. This isn't how you make things right." Her words stung, yet he saw the flicker of emotion in her eyes, a mixture of exhaustion, pain, and perhaps a trace of longing. He tried to explain, fumbling with words he had never learned to say. "I just want to be near you, Emily. To try, even if I fail." But she shook her head. Wanting isn't enough. You had chances before. What matters now is what you do, not what you say. That night, Michael returned to his hotel, her words echoing in his head. For a man who built his life on negotiations and strategies, he realized he couldn't bargain his way back into her trust. Words and wealth had lost their power. What Emily demanded was something he had never truly given: presence, consistency, humility. He lay awake, understanding that his old methods, lavish gestures, persuasive speeches, promises of luxury, would only push her further away. If he wanted a place in her life, and in the life of the child she carried, he would need to prove it day by day, with actions that cost not money, but himself. For the first time, Michael saw the road ahead not as a conquest, but as a pilgrimage, one that would require patience, vulnerability, and a willingness to change in ways that terrified him. And yet, he was willing. Michael Harrington returned to Willow Haven not as a benefactor, but as a volunteer. He traded his tailored suits for work boots and jeans, kneeling in the shelter's garden to pull weeds under the autumn sunday. The work was humbling. Soil lodged under his fingernails, sweat staining his collar, and his muscles aching in ways no boardroom ever demanded. At first, the staff eyed him with suspicion, whispering about the billionaire who had once been featured on magazine covers, now scrubbing floors and painting fences. But Michael didn't flinch. He arrived early, stayed late, and asked for no recognition. Slowly, his efforts began to speak louder than his name. Children waved when he walked in, and the staff started offering him small smiles. Though Emily kept her distance, he noticed her watching through office windows, her expression unreadable. For Michael, that quiet acknowledgement was the fuel he needed to keep coming back. Days turned into weeks, and Michael immersed himself in the rhythm of the shelter. He hauled boxes of donated clothes, repaired a broken fence, and even cooked meals alongside volunteers. One evening, during a sudden storm that cut the power, he lit candles and gathered the residents in the common room, reading aloud from To Kill a Mockingbird. His deep voice carried calm into the anxious night, and for the first time, the women and children saw not a businessman, but a man willing to be present. Emily stood at the doorway, arms folded, her face half hidden in the glow. Watching him comfort strangers reminded her of the man she once believed he could be. Still, she remained guarded, her heart stitched together too carefully to unravel so quickly. Yet a crack had formed in the wall she had built around herself, and Michael, though he didn't dare show it, felt hope. One late afternoon, as the golden light stretched across the garden, Emily finally approached him. He was repairing a flower bed, dirt smeared across his forearms, his once manicured hands roughened by labor. "You're persistent," she said, her voice even but tinged with curiosity. Michael straightened, brushing dirt from his jeans. "I have to be," he replied simply. She studied him for a long moment, her hazel eyes searching for sincerity. "Why now, Michael? Why after everything?" His throat tightened, but he answered quietly, "Because I realized too late that the empire I built meant nothing without you. And because I want to be the kind of man our child deserves." Emily's gaze softened slightly, though she quickly looked away. She wasn't ready to forgive, but she hadn't walked away either. For Michael, that sliver of hesitation was not a victory, but the beginning of one. The call came just before dawn. Michael Harrington had been at the shelter late into the evening, fixing a leaky pipe, when Sophia, the director, rushed in with urgency. "It's Emily," she said. Her water broke. We're taking her to the hospital now. Michael's heart slammed against his ribs. In a blur, he found himself in the back of a cab, the city lights streaking past as he whispered silent prayers to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. At the hospital, sterile white walls closed in on him, and for once, his wealth and influence were meaningless. He sat outside the maternity ward, gripping his hands until his knuckles whitened. Through the glass, he glimpsed nurses moving swiftly, and he caught the faint sound of Emily's voice, strained yet steady. It was the longest night of his life. Each second, stretching like an eternity. Hours later, the cry of a newborn pierced the silence, filling the corridor with life. Michael stood, his chest tightening as tears blurred his vision. A nurse emerged, smiling softly. "Mother and baby are both healthy," she said. Relief flooded him, leaving him momentarily weak. When Emily was settled, he was allowed into the room. She looked exhausted but radiant, her face glowing with the fragile triumph of new motherhood. In her arms lay the child, tiny, swaddled, and perfect. Michael stepped closer, his hands trembling as he gazed down at the infant's face. The weight of all he had lost, and all he still hoped to regain, settled over him. "A daughter," Emily whispered, her voice faint. Michael swallowed hard, overwhelmed. He wanted to reach out, to hold the child, but he hesitated, as though unworthy to touch something so pure. Finally, Emily lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes with quiet strength. "Do you want to hold her?" she asked, her tone cautious but not unkind. Michael nodded, his throat too tight for words. When she carefully placed the baby in his arms, the world shifted. The infant was impossibly small, her warmth seeping into him, her soft breaths brushing against his chest. For a man who had once measured worth in billions, this was the first moment he truly understood value. Tears spilled freely as he whispered, "I'll never walk away again." Emily studied him, her expression unreadable, but she didn't take the baby back. For now, that was enough. In that hospital room, beneath the soft hum of machines and the glow of morning light, Michael felt something he hadn't known in years, redemption waiting to be earned. In the weeks following his daughter's birth, Michael Harrington traded late-night boardrooms for midnight feedings. The man once defined by sharp suits and private jets now learned the delicate art of rocking a newborn to sleep. He stumbled through diaper changes, burned his first attempt at making formula, and fell asleep more than once in the stiff hospital chair beside Emily's bed. Yet, he didn't complain. For the first time in years, he found meaning in imperfection. The staff at Willow Haven noticed his transformation too. Michael continued volunteering, often bringing supplies for mothers in need, though he insisted his name not be attached to any donation. "This isn't about me," he told Sophia quietly. "It's about them." His humility surprised even himself. Slowly, his relentless ambition began to shift, no longer about conquest, but about building something that would outlast him: trust, service, and love. Emily, cautious yet observant, watched him closely. She had seen Michael make promises before, only to bury them under deadlines and meetings. But this was different. He arrived at the shelter on weekends to repaint walls, fix broken shelves, and drive mothers to appointments when no one else could. At night, he showed up at her modest home, not with lavish gifts, but with groceries or dinner he cooked himself. The sight of him cradling their daughter, reading children's books with unpolished tenderness, stirred something deep within her. Still, fear lingered. "How do I know this isn't temporary?" she asked one evening, her voice soft but steady. Michael set the baby gently in her crib, turning to face Emily with sincerity she hadn't seen in years. "Because for the first time, I'm not chasing the world," he said. "I'm chasing what I almost lost." The ultimate test came when Michael's company presented him with the opportunity of a lifetime, a multi-billion-dollar merger that required months of travel and complete focus. Old habits tugged at him, the allure of power whispering like a siren. But when he looked at his daughter sleeping peacefully in Emily's arms, he realized no deal could match the value of being present. To the shock of his board, he declined. "My family comes first," he told them firmly. The words, both terrifying and liberating. Rumors swirled in the press about him losing his edge, but Michael didn't care. For once, he wasn't building an empire of steel and glass. He was building a foundation of trust. And though Emily remained cautious, each day she saw more clearly that his love was no longer spoken in promises, but proven in action. The weeks after his daughter's birth reshaped Michael Harrington's life in ways he never anticipated. Once celebrated for dominating markets, he now found himself humbled by late-night feedings and early morning diaper changes. His sharp suits hung untouched in the closet, replaced by worn jeans and shirts spattered with formula. The same hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts now trembled as he held a bottle, learning patience with each feeding. At the hospital and later at Emily's home, he rarely left her side, sleeping on stiff chairs, ready to respond at every cry. At Willow Haven, the shelter staff marveled at his dedication. He volunteered quietly, hauling boxes, cleaning rooms, and buying supplies, always insisting no credit be given. "It's not about me anymore," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. For the first time, Michael wasn't chasing headlines. He was chasing something far more precious: redemption through presence. Emily noticed the changes, but carried her doubts like armor. She had seen Michael make vows before, only to bury them under ambition. Yet this version of him was different. He arrived at her modest home with groceries instead of extravagant gifts, cooked dinner in her small kitchen, and sat on the floor reading bedtime stories to their daughter. There was an awkward tenderness in the way he held picture books upside down or stumbled over rhymes, but his sincerity was undeniable. Watching him laugh softly at his own mistakes stirred something deep within her. Still, her voice remained cautious. "How do I know this isn't temporary?" she asked one evening. Michael paused, placing their daughter gently in her crib, his eyes steady on hers. "Because I've spent my life chasing everything outside these walls," he confessed, "and none of it matters if I lose what's inside them." The true test came when Michael's company offered him the pinnacle of success, a multi-billion-dollar merger that demanded months of travel and his full attention. Old instincts urged him to seize it, the thrill of power calling like it always had. But this time, he resisted. "My family comes first," he told his astonished board, his voice unwavering. The decision sent shockwaves through the media. Some called it reckless, others hailed it as courageous, but Michael no longer cared. Every evening he returned to Emily's porch, his daughter in his arms, reading stories under the soft glow of porch lights. Slowly, Emily began to see that his love was no longer spoken in empty promises, but proven in sacrifices. Trust, once shattered, was being rebuilt not by grandeur, but by daily acts of devotion. And for Michael, every small step forward was worth more than any empire. If this chapter moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Soul Touch for more powerful short stories that explore love, redemption, and second chances. Hit the like button if you believe people can truly change, and leave a comment below to share your thoughts. We love hearing your voice in this community. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that growth is possible. Thank you for being here. Your support inspires us to keep telling stories that touch the soul.